You know, I grew up in the 1980s. The very first president I ever remember seeing on television was Ronald Reagan. And he definitely looked the part. He definitely had the speaking ability. He had the voice for it. He had the look for it. He looked very presidential. And he was very patriotic, and it was a very patriotic time. You know, back in the 80s, every action figure, the G.I. Joes, was the real American hero. Hulk Hogan came walking to the ring waving an American flag. So it was a very patriotic time in our country. And then you had First Lady Nancy Reagan, who was always doing the Just Say No to Drugs and raising awareness about that. And I remember all the videos we watched back in grade school of that stuff. I bet if I looked hard enough, I could probably find a picture of me wearing my Just Say No to Drugs shirt back when I was in grade school. And everybody had those DARE stickers on the back of their car about drug awareness and rehabilitation. And so it was a very patriotic time, and it was a time of Just Say No to Drugs, but it was also the time of the Satanic Panic. And I'm sure a lot of you all remember this. Everything out there was deemed to be of the devil. I grew up in a little small town of Middlesboro, Kentucky, which, by the way, was the home of actor Lee Majors. We were told that going to the shopping mall was of the devil. We were told that if we went to the shopping mall, there was these devil worshipers out there that would get us, and they would win us over and suck us into their cults. So we were always looking over our shoulders. And we were told that bands like AC/DC, the initials stood for After Christ the Devil Comes, or Antichrist, Devil's Children. Later on, I found out that Angus Young said they just got the name off the Sisters vacuum cleaner. And then the band Kiss, that was supposed to stand for Knights in Satan's Service. And it was still people were still trying to play Stairway to Heaven backwards and see if they could hear him say, My Sweet Satan. That's pretty much the era that I grew up in. Had you told me back though in the 80s that we would still be there in 2024, I'd have said, no, we'll outgrow that bullshit eventually. But no, as a matter of fact, MAGA come along and they've took it to a whole new level. Here is Candace Owens talking about how that science is a cult. Get a load of this.
My poor husband, he rolls over. He's like, what are you reading? And I feel like a regular wife says something, I don't know, maybe a love series, Nora Roberts, sweeping her away. Me, on the other hand, he rolled over, he asked me, and I said, oh, I'm reading a flat earth theory. And it dawned into an entire conversation. He's like, why are you reading a flat earth theory? And I'm like, because somebody messaged me on Connect about it and they included some links and I'm just reading them. I don't know. I'm just an interested person. No matter what, if there's a bunch of people that believe something, I now want to know what it is that they believe. And of course, he pushed me on this and he was talking about the earth curvature and science. And I said to him, listen, I'm not a flat earther. I'm not a round earther. Actually, what I am somebody who has left the cult of science. I have left the mega church of science because what I have now realized is that science, what it is actually, if you think about it, is a pagan faith.
So luckily for me, I had two very open-minded parents who didn't try to push all of the satanic panic down my throat and didn't try to keep me living in fear. Anytime I came home and told them something the minister or Sunday school teacher said or someone said at school, that was trying to stoke fear in me, they would always tell me to look into it for myself, to read about it, study about it, come to my own understanding about it before I panicked. And I was very lucky in that department that I didn't have two parents that were very forceful and didn't make me buy into all that stuff. But apparently Candace Owens didn't get the same memo and didn't have the same kind of parents because she's out here spreading this fear and paranoia and propaganda and saying that science is a pagan faith and saying that science is a cult. Folks, she's doing this today for the same reason they were doing it back in the 80s, and that is they want to demonize education as much as they can. They want to demonize public education. That's why they're always saying that public education is grooming their children. They're the ones that wants to ban certain books. They're the ones that wants to prevent kids from reading certain things because they don't want the kids to become educated. They want to be able to go in there and rewrite history and whitewash history to make it look like them and to portray themselves as the good guys. I mean, these are the same people who have actually sat and said that black people benefited from slavery. That's the things they want to teach to their children. And so if their child goes out into the world and gets a public education and goes to college and learns that, hey, the world is a much bigger place than a little small town we grew up in, then that definitely goes against everything that the conservatives have taught their kids, and they don't want their kids buying into that. They don't want their kids to read and study things for themselves. They want their kids to stay right in line, walk right in line with who they are. You know, for her to call science a cult and to say that science is a faith, that's just her trying to demonize it. But science has questions that may never be answered. Religion has answers that may never be questioned. And that's what I always point out to people. Religion, if you question it, then you're considered you're considered evil at that point. I remember back when I was in Sunday school, I was kicked out of Sunday school for asking questions. And the question that got me removed from Sunday school, believe it or not, was the Sunday school teacher was telling us that the only way to get to heaven was through Jesus Christ. You had to be born again through Jesus Christ. You had to profess your faith in him and accept him as your Lord and Savior. And if you didn't do that, you wouldn't make it into heaven. Well, the first thought that went through my mind was, well, what about people that was born before Jesus? So I asked that question. Hey, what about people who was born before Jesus? He said, well, don't worry, Jesus made a way for them. I said, how? He didn't have an answer. Then I was like, well, what about people in all these different countries that never heard of Jesus? You know, I mean, the Americas hadn't been discovered yet. There was a lot of the world that hadn't been discovered yet. So what about those people? Oh, I'm sure Jesus came to America and talked about it. Well, where does it say that in the Bible? Me and this guy went around in circles, and I was like, well, what about the Native Americans? You know, they were over here. Jesus was there. Well, he probably traveled over here while he was in the tomb and talked with them. I mean, me and this guy goes around in circles till finally he takes me to my mom, and he's like, hey, you know, your son's asking a whole lot of questions. He's disrupting class. I'm losing control of the class. And then the minister comes along, and he's like, well, you know, Brandon, maybe you're a little bit more advanced. Maybe you just need to sit out here with the adults so I can work on you out here. And I will never forget the way he said that. So I can work on you out here. The further I get away from that moment and the further I get away from that statement, the more I understand it. At the time, I thought he meant it in a positive way. So at the time, I'm sitting there. Now I'm out there with the adults. I'm 11 or 12-year-old, and I'm sitting there with the adults, and I'm watching this. You got to understand, I'm in a southeastern Kentucky Pentecostal church. I mean, these people really throw down and get wild with it. They truly do. I mean, they walk on the backs of the pews, speak in tongues, hit each other in the head, fall over. I mean, it's a show. So now you're sitting there just holding on for dear life, like, what am I looking at? And I had questions for that too. And I questioned it until one day I just stopped going. And then later on in life, I tried to go back one more time. When I was 20-year-old, I tried to go back one more time. And the minister went so far to the right back then that I couldn't sit there because I didn't want to be guilty by association. And now I sure as hell wouldn't go back to his church because he's a full-blown Trumper all the way. And so that's why Brando walked away from religion, was because I wasn't allowed to ask questions and because I saw the holes in their story. And they don't want that to happen. They don't want more people to follow in the footsteps of me and others that like me that have walked away from it. I've ran into so many people in my lifetime who have shared similar stories as to how they walked away from religion and how they walked away from their conservative families. They don't want that. They don't want people doing that. They want people all walking in line. So that's why they'll go out of their way to say that science is a cult and that science is a faith. They do anything they can to demonize it. They do anything they can to rewrite history to make it all look good for them. You know, they say that history is written by the winner, but here lately what we have saw is the far right get a hold of it and try to rewrite it and try to reframe it. And I think one of the most eye-opening moments that I've had here recently that I truly feel bad about, if I got to be honest with you, is I was talking with my daughter, who is 21 years old. And we were talking, and there was so much about history she didn't know. And she said to me, Dad, they didn't teach it in school. They didn't teach any of that. And it was very common things that we were talking about that I thought any kid should know about, and she didn't know about it because she wasn't taught. So now me and her have been, you know, passing back different books back and forth, and I've been sending her, you know, documentaries and podcasts to listen to try to bring her up to speed. But she wasn't taught those things, and so in school. And so now you got to stop and think about all the people that weren't taught those things. Then they hear a Candace Owens or a Charlie Kirk or some other MAGA talking head, and they're up there telling them, this is what this country was founded on, and this is what this country was founded on, and black people benefited from slavery, and all this ridiculous stuff they'll say. And I could see where if a kid had never been exposed to it, and then they saw some, you know, slick talker like a Candace Owens or a Charlie Kirk, I could see where they would roll right along with it. That's why more and more of us have to speak up and speak out and talk about these things, because it really is for educational purposes. It truly is. But when I saw that video, I just had a flashback for a minute of back in the 80s and the Satanic Panic. And if you'd asked me back then, I would have said we would have outgrew it. But apparently Candace Owens hasn't, so there's that.